And that what happens to me, what occurs in my life, what happens to me and what I am are the same thing. I've said that a few times, and for the first time said, and what is that thing? It's the same thing. And what is that thing? What is that same thing? What occurs, what happens in my life, what happens, so to speak, to me, and what I happen to be are the same thing. Yeah. It's this living, it's this alive, being alive. We take it so much for granted that we actually are being, and not just being. Maybe alive and being, they're synonymous. I don't know, maybe they're not. But being alive. And of course, these days, these last few months, the strength of living and the fragility of living with this virus floating around becomes very palpable and visible. And for some families, very, very real, with loved ones sick and or dying, and dying by themselves, alone. Something that we never think that this could happen. I mean, of course, it always has happened to some people, but this could happen to so many people all over the world, and their loved ones can't just be there. So this aliveness is what I want to talk about. There are usually two Zooms. I mean, there's 4 Zooms that I do weekly, but now with this one is the third that has to do with Dharma, and I give a talk. And usually, since the Zoom in the Midwest, to speak about it broadly, because it's Ohio, and there are a lot of people from Indiana and Michigan, and not a lot of people from all of those places, but people from various places in Ohio. And what's the other state next to it? Anyway, St. Louis, Missouri, right? It's not too close, but anyway, it's a good member of the Sangha there. And I tend to speak about the same topic because it's alive, and one I do it on Saturday mornings, and the other one I do it on Sunday afternoon. And now there's this one on Wednesday evening. The quote that's been in my mind today, specifically, is that in Japanese the 2 words are eko hensho. I think it's that, hensho, eko hensho. And it's that quote from Dogen. I mean, it's been quoted many places, it's a phrase that it's used in Zen a lot. And in Dogen, at some point he says, stop. Take the backward step and shine the light back. You're like that, looking, wondering, what is this? Where am I going? Da, da, da. Stop. Take the backward step and shine the light back. Sometimes people have translated, they use the word interior, shine the light inside your heart, mind. And it's not a very good translation. This is not my opinion, it's opinion that people that know about it. Not because it's necessarily wrong, but it's because of our Christian background and the interiority. We have it all, it's all about the interior of this. And that it is inside where we find the truth. And of course in Zen, inside, outside, not much different. We find the truth in the mountains and rivers. We find the truths in our suffering fellow human being. We find the truth in our loving partner. We find the truth in our loving dog or cat. We find the truth in a rolling toilet paper. So that, I have this image, if this was like a lantern, a flashlight, not lantern that illumines the whole thing, but it's pointing forward, the light, looking, Stop, take the backward step and shine the light back. Whoops, what is it? There I find myself, alive, in whatever shape or form. The same aliveness that Zhao Zhou tells the student, what is meditation? And Zhao Zhou says, it is not meditation. And then she says, why is it not meditation? Why is meditation not meditation? And Zhao Zhou says, it's alive. It's alive. No matter what happens, and we're there, that's our life. And I would say that we learn this in our practice. And the only reason I'm mentioning this is because we are practitioners. I wouldn't necessarily speak about this to people in general. I might suggest that it might be an interesting thing to consider. So the topic that I've been talking about in the last couple of Zooms is the topic of trust. And there's a quote on Kobuncino Otogawa, who was the founder of Jikoji, the Santa Cruz Mountains, who came to San Francisco to help Suzuki Roshi, was sent by Japan, Sotoshu, to help Suzuki Roshi establish Tassajara and to train the monks there and to, the ceremonies and stuff. Soto is all of those things are very important. The meticulousness of the ceremonies and the liturgy. And he eventually stayed in this country and founded his own groups, and in Europe, in Switzerland, I think in France too, and certainly here in California. Two of the women that are his heirs are part of the little group that we have of Bay Area small groups and teachers. And he says that this sitting still is the practice of trust. This happens all the time, doesn't it? The practice of trust, this sitting still. We're so accustomed sometimes when we confront ourselves, something that we don't particularly like. We want to run away. In Zen practice, this sitting in Zazen, we encounter everything, you know. When people ask about Sesshin, I tell them you will experience glorious gratitude, openness of heart, spaciousness all around you, goodwill, and you'd also experience just fear, maybe even terror, boredom, you know, the whole gamut. And we're familiar with that, you know. It's part of being alive, but also it's part of being a Zen student, that we learn how to be with what is and attend to it, whether it's very difficult or very uncomfortable, or we find ourselves running away madly from it. And then I find myself, whoa, what are you doing? Running away. I don't want to deal with this. Please, I'm out of here. So this trust in ourselves, it's really this trust, it's a trust in our practice, really. It's trust in our practice, and our practice is our Zazen. It's our embodiment of this aliveness, of this being. And that's not the way we live, you know, I know that. Most of the time we're so busy trying to make ends meet or whatever, dealing with terrible problems or just highly highly too much fun or whatever, you know. I sometimes have a hard time pronunciating distraction, not destruction, distraction, distractiveness. Anyway. So it is our life. And sitting in Zazen is something. Why is it that so many of us, without really knowing too much about Zen, we are drawn to something like that? There's something about sitting still for minutes in a row, you know, 20, 15, 40, 45. A couple of years ago, I heard something in NPR. I think it was an interview, maybe Fresh Air, I don't remember. But it was about a man that experienced some very profound change in his life, some kind of tragedy, and left him completely without knowing what to do. He tried all sorts of things. I don't remember if he was an author, a book author, a poet, a movie maker, novelist. I don't remember. I just remember that was a man and that he tried all sorts of things. And he ends up doing, he never mentions the word meditation. Maybe at the end of the talk, of the interviewer might have said something about meditation. Mm-hmm. You were meditating. He says that the only thing he could do was just to sit quietly, and he was not in a big city. So he might have been sitting quietly in his garden, looking at the trees, looking at the mountains or something. And that's the only energy that he had. He tried a few things, and the only energy left was just sitting there with nothing in mind, nothing, wishing nothing, but just sit there. And little by little, something started to change, you know, and he came back to life. And he eventually, you know, I don't know how long that this was, but so there's really something about this sitting. I remember when I first started sitting and would arrive at St. Dorothy's for sesshin, and I was very busy working in those days during the week. At the same time, I had all the time that I wanted to take off for sesshin. Didn't matter. I just did everything, every sesshin. But arriving at St. Dorothy's on a Friday evening and sitting down, and man, it was one of the most joyous, well, maybe I shouldn't call it joyous, but just very happy, very pleasantly big happiness of nothing, you know, but just happy to be starting sesshin. And it really caught me by surprise that something that simple and at the same time that hard, because sesshin, as you all know, it's hard. And we go through days that, you know, we really don't want to be there. At least it happened to me. It still happens to me. The difference is that, so what? I'm there and I'm going to be there, whether I want to or not. Luckily, of course, it's not a big fight. Yeah. So Capuchino mentioning the sitting still there, you know, how is the foundation I don't know if he uses that word, foundation, of this trust. And it's not trust in our regular self, because this trust comes from forgetting the self, he says. This trust comes from turning the light backwards and shining it to this thing and being surprised. What is it? Being surprised and seeing something newer, especially the first few years that we start, you know. Some of us have been practicing for a long time. Some of you have been practicing way more than I have been practicing. Zen. This forgetting of the self, that it's to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened, to be confirmed, to be touched, to be recognized by the 10,000 things. It's almost like you're invited. It's really, you find yourself being invited by something that's also yourself. So many of us start a practice with not much trust in ourselves or in things in general. Nowadays, you know, the different things going on around the world. But of course, within the background and the front ground of this pandemia. But the social, cultural disturbances, explosions, protests, violence, hope, hope, beauty, in the midst of all of this, you know. Sometimes we wonder, you know, is there anything that one can trust, you know? The institutions. So many of us, we've seen our institutions being taken over by greed and corruption and self-aggrandizement of the few. What is there to trust? Sesshin, it's to touch the heart mind. And that's my favorite verb in that sentence. Sometimes it says to recognize, to become intimate with, but to touch, I find it the best for me, you know, just because of its sense, it implies the senses, you know, and it implies the body. And we put the body comes to the cushion and we sit. It's an embodied practice. It's in this body, whatever shape, form we have it, how comfortable we are sitting the way we used to sit or uncomfortable, etc. Sit in a chair, bench. I've actually gotten accustomed to sit in a chair. And I don't find myself longing for something different. Although some people tell me, Daniel, maybe you'll be able to sit in Zazen after your surgery. And I can sit for 25, half an hour without any problem. But it's not good for me. After I get up, I'm in a lot of pain. So, you know, maybe I will. I was telling Nelson Foster, but what I'm really interested is going up and down a hill. If I just have to pick one, do I go back to the floor to sit Zazen? Or do I go back to be able to go uphill and come downhill? I'm afraid I would pick up going up and downhill. I've sat for 30 years on the floor. I can sit my next 30 years, I can sit on a bench. This coming back that we do in our practice, in this embodied practice, we come back to our Zazen, sitting. I think that's really what gives us the trust that I'm talking about. The trust that no matter what I find in my path, I can, well, I often say, I know I'm in the appropriate place. I know it's not a mistake. I know it's some kind of trick that the universe is presenting on me and I'm an innocent bystander. By definition, Of course I don't like it sometimes. Of course. And it sucks sometimes. But it's my suckiness, It's my life. Without a doubt. It's our life. And I think for me, that was something that I found for the first time once I started practicing Zen. There's this generosity of this practice that encourages me and tells me over and over again that I'm enough to do this practice. I'm enough to do this practice. I'm enough to do this life. Badly, half badly, gracefully, you name it. But the willingness, I trust that. I think we learn or we find ourselves trusting this more and more. The teachings point at this all the time. The thusness, the tathata, the thusness of things, of situation, full and complete, just this kind of expression of the thusness. No past, no future, but the thisness. When the Buddha wakes up, he says, I and all beings simultaneously wake up, have attained the way. And, I mention this often, and this is not something that we try to convince ourselves, but we start to intuitively see a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and experience the moment, a moment, just as it is, that it encompasses everything else. Not that we say even that. Most of our daily life, all of those experiences do happen, but they are so ordinary that we can't even associate it with anything about practice. Where the self is forgotten completely. And the situation just calls for this, and you're this. Call, response, boom, boom. And what is that? What is it that, why is it that we do that? Why is it that we don't even notice that we do that? Why is it that sometimes we notice in moments that are completely baffling, and we say, wow. Yamada Koun, when he wakes up, starts waking up, his experience of awakening on the train coming from, I think, Tokyo to Kamakura, where he lived with his wife. And he had something happen in the train, but then when he arrived home, probably late, he was the administrator, the general manager, or whatever you might call it, the director of a clinic in which his wife was the boss. She was a medical doctor. And he wakes up in the middle of the night crying and laughing and screaming. The ancestors never lied to me. They didn't lie to me. They didn't lie to me. The wife wakes up and says, hey, what are you doing, hon? They didn't lie to me. And he was just so ecstatic. That's in the 3 pillars of Zen. Doesn't say who he is, but it says YK. Yeah. There's that recognition. That luminosity of recognition. That recollection of what actually we are as our true nature. So, dear ones, that's what I wanted to share. It's good, you know, I'm so grateful. Probably you hear me so much say that, but I don't know what is the best word to describe sometimes the feeling and the gratitude in the heart, the bigness of being alive. This week was a little, last week and until Monday that I went to see the surgeon to make sure there he had gotten all my tests, you know, the cardiology, the regular doctor, the this, the that. And I, you know, it's always the doubt. I wondered, is there anything weird in my electrocardiogram? Is it going to be weird, something here? No, there's nothing weird. And without me even noticing, I knew there was some weird energy in that, in the week, you know, of sort of a little tension and a little, sometimes, what's it, irritability and unease. Not too heavy, but it was there. But then leaving, my friend Kathleen took me because the doctor wanted somebody to be with me so she or he would hear all what needs to be known, since he knows I live alone. And then leaving the office, I felt so light, you know, and I realized how much I had been holding, or it had been held in my psyche, in my heart, in my mind, in my body. Plus, whatever is going on in the body objectively, you know, my balance is weird because of the knee. So there, you know, it's just this brightness that I'm familiar with. We're all familiar with. It's all good, all the way down to the bottom, the very bottom. It's always been good, and it always will be good, even when we're just rotting. So, yes, the grace that this practice gives us, the gratitude that flows naturally from our minds, our hearts, because it's so big and it includes everything and everybody. We don't even know that, although sometimes we do know it. Thank you. I would love to hear from some of you if you feel like saying something. Welcome everyone. It's very nice to see you all. And did I see now? There's Nettie. Hi, sweetie.
The great Prajna Paramita Heart Sutra, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva practicing deep Prajna Paramita clearly saw that all five skandhas empty, transforming all suffering and distress. Shariputra, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form, form is exactly emptiness, emptiness exactly form, sensation, perception, mental reaction, consciousness are also like this. Shariputra, all things are essential, empty, not born, not destroyed, not stained, not pure, without loss, without gain. Therefore in emptiness there is no form, no sensation, perception, mental reaction, consciousness, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no color, sound, smell, taste, touch, object of thought, no seeing, and so on, to no thinking, no ignorance, and also no ending of ignorance, and so on, to no old age and death, and also no ending of old age and death, no suffering, cause of suffering, cessation path, no wisdom and no attainment, since there is nothing to attain. The Bodhisattva lives by Prajna Paramita, with no hindrance in the mind, no hindrance, and therefore no fear, far beyond delusive thinking. Right here is nirvana. All Buddhas of past, present, and future live by Prajna Paramita, attaining Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Therefore know that Prajna Paramita is the great sacred mantra, the great vivid mantra, the unsurpassed mantra, the supreme mantra, which completely removes all suffering. This is truth, not mere formality. Therefore set forth the Prajna Paramita mantra. Set forth this mantra and proclaim Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasangate, Bodhisvaha. the four great vows. The many beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Greed, hatred, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them. Dharma gates are countless. I vow to wake to them. The Buddha way is unsurpassed. I vow to embody it fully. The many beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Greed, hatred, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them. Dharma gates are countless. I vow to wake to them. The Buddha way is unsurpassed. I vow to embody it fully. The many beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Greed, hatred, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them. Dharma gates are countless. I vow to wake to them. The Buddha way is unsurpassed. I vow to embody it fully.
Well, thank you, everyone. I would like to ask Phil and Gregory and Jay and Mike and to stay for 5 minutes or so. Okay. Thank you all for being here. Nice to see you, Carol, Nettie, Kamala, Bill K. Thanks.